Hi, welcome back to This Week, and we're going to be talking about how we turn this Raspberry Pi Zero into a spectrophotometer. This week we're going to talk through how we set up the Pi Zero to make that work, and we're going to go through that right from the beginning for a total beginner. Grace is going to do all the work and show us how it's done to show that it's really straightforward and there's nothing too complicated there. And then as we go, we'll maybe explain why it took us quite so long. We've had a few technical hitches along the way, and then a haircut, which meant that we had to reshoot some of it for continuity errors. So, hi, this is Grace.
Hi, this is Neil.
And together, we're Atomic
Kitchen.
Okay, so what we're going to do, as we've discussed before, is turn this little Raspberry Pi Zero board into a spectrophotometer using this Raspberry Pi camera chip as well. You could do this with this sort of larger Raspberry Pi. This is one of the original Raspberry Pis, first ones that they produced. And the same principles will work. You'll be able to do all the same things. But we're going to do it with the smallest one because it's the cheapest. In some ways it's actually easier to do it with the large one. Some of the things that we're about to do in terms of configuring it make life slightly simpler because of the interfaces you've got available. Okay, but Grace is going to do all the work from now on.
Yay!
So this Raspberry Pi is a Pi Zero W. That means it's a Pi Zero with wireless built in. It's a tiny single board computer. So there's a processor, that's this big black chip here. The memory is all on board as well. And there's even a Wi-Fi chip somewhere in here. And then we've got a couple of USB interfaces, a mini HDMI interface for connecting it to a display, and then this little socket here is for connecting an SD card into with memory in it.
Is this what this is for? Because that looks like a HDMI and that looks like the mini one.
That's right. So if you want to connect that to a television, you would plug that into there, and then plug this into the cable that goes to your television. Okay, we might get to that bit in a little bit of time. Okay, first thing we're going to need to be able to do to make this work, of course, is to be able to get some power into it. So you're going to need a power supply.
With the tiny little USB?
Yep, with a USB connector on there. A classic USB connector that was found on most Android phones until very recently, and now starting to see some other USB-C connectors on there, but still very common power supply that you need. To power the Pi Zero with the camera, you probably need about a 1 amp power supply. Actually, the Raspberry Pi Foundation recommend a 2.5 amp power supply, although they seem to say the same for all of their boards, right up until the brand new Raspberry Pi 4, which has been announced this week. And they are saying that you need a 3 amp power supply for that. They supply one specifically for that. So basically, the more powerful the board is, the more energy it's going to take to make it work, and therefore you need a better power supply. But that's essentially what we're going to do, and we'll plug this bit into the mains. But to make that work, we're obviously going to need an operating system. Do you know what an operating system is, Grace?
Nope.
Okay, so an operating system is the thing that controls everything on your computer. It manages which files get saved where, which things get moved into memory, which things get processed on the computer, all that sort of stuff. So you have an operating system on your phone. You use an Android phone, so Android is the operating system. If you had an iPhone, you would use iOS as the operating system. If, as we do for our video editing, you were using a Mac, then you would be using a version of OS X, that's the operating system on a Mac. And then most computers are using Windows as their operating system. The Raspberry Pi is using Linux as its operating system, or a version of Linux called Raspbian. And Linux is an operating system that's used around the world on servers, on small computers, on everything. And it's incredibly powerful and can be very simple and lightweight, where it's all just controlled from the command line, little black and white screens really, or can have a lovely user interface on it that's as attractive to use as Windows or a Mac.
Cool.
So we've got to get an operating system onto there, and to do that we need something which is equivalent to the hard disk you'd have on your computer. So that little tiny wee SanDisk memory chip there, that is a micro SD card. That's an 8 GB card, which is what the Raspberry Pi Foundation say is the minimum for putting the Raspberry Pi operating system on and getting it onto these devices. So it's an 8 GB card, and that will fit in this little slot here on the Raspberry Pi. But to get the software onto there, we need to put it into our computer, and our computer doesn't have a slot for that size. Our computer has a slot this size, so we need this little adapter. So do you want to put the memory card into the adapter?
Good.
Yep. Okay. And essentially the hard disk, or this is the equivalent of a hard disk, and a hard disk is storing things that we want to still be there after we turn the power off. That's the important thing. So memory will store things that are there when the power is turned on, but things that are on this little disk are going to be stored after the power is turned off. And the first most important thing is to get an operating system on there. There are different ways to get the Raspbian operating system onto this little chip, but because you're new to this and because we're trying to create a tutorial that other people could follow, we're going to follow the simplest way, which is to go to the Raspberry Pi Foundation website and download their Noobs version of Raspbian. So everything's set up, easy to use for a total beginner. Okay, so after a little wait, we are back, and we've downloaded that file. And if Grace just points to where that file goes, you don't need to click it again because we've got it there, but just up here, the one beside it. Okay. So Grace is just pointing there to show that's where you'll find the file if you're using Safari. If you're using Chrome or you're using a browser on a PC, you'll know where to find your downloads. And if you go over to here, we can go straight to that file. We've already unzipped it because we got a bit carried away there before we started recording again. But there is that folder called Noobs, and that's what it will look like when it's unzipped.
You said unzipped. What does unzipped mean?
So when people are moving files around on the internet or storing large amounts of data, quite often we do something called zipping. And zipping is where we take a bunch of files and we squish them into something smaller and then zip it up and seal it into a smaller package. So we take some large files, squish them up and zip them, and then unzipping is the opposite. So we decompress them, we let them back out, open up the zip and let the stuffing out, if you like. And it's a very common way of compressing files and ending up with one file to move around. So we've got that folder called Noobs there, Grace. So if you open that up, and then inside Noobs, you'll see there's a load of folders there. But the interesting one for us is that one called instructions readme.txt. And when we open that up, you can see that we get some instructions on the screen there telling us what it is we need to do now. And this is what we did the other night, and this is where it all went wrong, because we couldn't format the SD card successfully. So there's information there, depending which operating system you're using, on how to format the SD card. So we have followed that instruction and we have gone, because we're using a Mac, to sdcard.org, downloaded that little tool, and if you just go to the search icon in the top right, Grace, and type SD card, hopefully we can find that tool again. Shoot, just press return and you'll get that. Okay, and so if we pop this into our USB hub over here, so we've put the brand new SD card into this SD card USB adapter, which seems to be working when we tested it earlier. But we've not tested this card yet, so let's try. Does that card show up? Yes. So there's mass storage device 3. We can see it's almost a 16 GB card. There we are now 98% complete, 99% complete, and 100% complete. So it successfully formatted that card. 32-bit FAT, or FAT32 file system for anyone that's into the details or trying to use a different tool and wants to know how to set it up. So we've managed to format the card. We haven't quite used the instructions there on how to do it because the proper instructions don't seem to work, but fingers crossed, we will have done what we need to do. Okay, instruction number 3 here is to extract the files contained in the new. Instruction number 3 is to extract the files contained in the Noobs zip file. Okay, we've got the Noobs zip file, that's how we're reading this file. And then we are going to copy those files onto the SD card. So if you go to Finder, Grace, just click the one behind that. Into the Pi 0. I think you just moved rather than dragging. So if we pop back to the downloads folder, downloads folder, select from OS, and scroll down to the bottom of that folder, which is Recover 4 ELF. Hold down Shift, that's it, and then click and drag into the Pi0 folder.
That work. Doing something.
That's right, so it's moving files, and guess what? It's going to be a little bit slow again because there's massive amounts of data here to do. Looks like everything's now downloaded onto the Pi0. So if you just pop over to that file, the Pi0 there, and just check that there's a bunch of files on there. Yeah, and there are. There's absolutely loads there, and that all looks good. So then you can just tell it to eject that by clicking that little icon. Yep. And then now that it's gone, that means we can safely remove the SD card from the computer. So that's the adapter out, and then it's a little bit fiddly, but that's the card that we're going to pop into the Pi0. Okay, Grace. So Grace has here a little box that came with the Raspberry Pi kit that we bought. You can buy the Pi boards individually, or you can buy them as a set, and if you get a set, you'll often get some sort of box or casing. You can make your own box or casing, and in fact, when we come to do the spectrometer, we might need to do exactly that. But for right now, this is just going to protect it when we're just giving everything a test. So that's the box. It's got some little feet on it to go on it. So if Grace pops them on first, and then the other thing to notice about this particular box design is that the SD card has to be inside the Raspberry Pi before the Raspberry Pi goes into the box. So you can connect the power and you can connect various other things to it inside the box, but you cannot take the SD card in and out when it's in the box. So a little bit less faff if you get it right in the right order first of all. So now we've got those nice rubber feet on to protect it. Pop the SD card into the Raspberry Pi, and then pop the Raspberry Pi into the bottom of the box. And it's got some nice little lugs on this box just to align it all. And then when it fits snugly, that's it there. And you can see on the side now, we've got ports there for power, for USB, and for the HDMI connector. So, Grace, if you want to connect in the various bits and pieces there, so the USB adapter, and this is a micro USB adapter to going to a standard USB connector. Then we'll pop this keyboard connector in there so that we can actually control the Raspberry Pi. This is our power supply, and Grace will hook that up. So Grace has hooked up the power supply. We've got the USB in, and then the last thing that we need to connect is the HDMI adapter that's going to allow us to connect this to our TV or computer monitor. And then Grace can put the lid onto the little case there, just to protect everything. So we'll go and hook this up, and fingers crossed this is going to boot up. And what we're looking for is a little red light flashing on top. That will be the first sign of success. And then if we get it all right, we'll also see something on the TV screen. Okay, so we are back in action again. The Raspberry Pi is booting up, this time trying from the Noobs Lite installation. We had some problems using the Noobs one. One file seemed to continually report being missing. So rather than go and download that massive file again, this time we've tried Noobs Lite, which means we need a Wi-Fi or an internet connection to make that work. But we have that, and we can see how to do that. So that's it telling us we need network access, so we have to set that up first of all. So close that screen, Grace, and then you know which Wi-Fi to pick there, probably
Yes,
with
but
the
how do
arrow
we pick-
keys. Yep.
Yeah.
And then you know what the password is there to pop in. It is now connecting to our Wi-Fi, and I think you should try the top one there, Grace. So yeah, so the full Raspbian install, which is what we tried to do earlier but didn't really work, but let's try it now. And then I to make it install without a keyboard. So we don't have a keyboard
You mean
because Yes, that's right. The I to install without a mouse. We don't have a mouse because we've only connected one thing to the USB port. Because we're using the hub to record the video and the camera and everything else that we're using on the computer at the moment. So we've gone a little bit off piece there. So ideally, probably things are easier for people doing this if they've got both a mouse and a keyboard installed, unless you're used to working without a mouse. We can see it's going to take a little while.
See you soon.
Well, that's the message that we've been waiting for, Grace. It says it's been installed correctly. So,
Enter.
Yep, press enter. And now I think the Raspberry Pi will reboot for the first time itself. There we go. That's kind of what we're expecting to see, and we'll probably get a whole load of text appears on the screen as it boots up. We've got the all-important mouse in the top left there. There's the desktop installed, and we'll see some options there. So, okay, we are recording. Yep. Okay, so we have finally managed to get everything working. So we used Noobs Lite to get this far. We've had to reboot the Raspberry Pi after its first install, but we made it through this. It's now just running some updates, but it looks like we can start getting going on some other things while that's happening, Grace. So if you press Alt and F2, okay, that brings up the run command. That lets you type in any command you want to execute in the Linux environment. It'll run that for us just directly. Okay, so we do that by typing, just like we were at a command prompt, and we'll see what the command prompt is in just a moment. But the first command I want to type is LX terminal. All one word. It's TERMINEL. MI. Yeah, and you see it's already auto-completing it for you. So, yeah. Okay. So LX terminal is the command prompt on a Raspberry Pi. It is a little screen which allows you to issue commands and see what's going on your Raspberry Pi, or at least it should. There it is. It's popped up. Yeah, and that's what you'll see. You'll see that Pi at Raspberry Pi little prompt there. That tells you who the user is and what they're logged into. Okay, and that is essentially how Linux works. That's all about that prompt, and that we can issue commands there and control the computer. And when we see nice, pretty windows on top of the screen, usually they're actually just controlling things like this behind the scenes. Okay, so the first thing I want you to do, Grace, is to type sudo, S-U-D-O, space apt, A-P-T, hyphen get, space, install. Two L's. Yeah, space, record, and then it looks like a capital M. No, all one word. So it's record, and then capital M, capital M, Y, capital D, ESK, TOP. Okay, so that command, do you know what that does?
Does it put onto your Pi desktop?
That's right, so it's going to install a piece of software called Record My Desktop onto our Raspberry Pi. The first little bit there, sudo, or super user do. So what that's saying is, let me do something that normally the person that's logged in might not have permission to do. Yeah? Okay. So it will probably ask for or sometimes it'll ask for a password for that. Okay. Then apt-get is the package manager that Raspberry Pi uses, very common in Linux. And then install is telling it to install it. If we already had it installed, it would be update there if we just wanted to update it. Okay, so press return and it should go and do some stuff. It will take a wee moment.
What does all this
okay. So in fact, the updater that was running on the Raspberry Pi
is actually already using, so that window that says welcome to Raspberry Pi, please wait while we update, is already using that.
Okay, so after a bit of messing around, we have managed to get the Raspberry Pi Zero booted up from Raspberry Pi Noobs Lite. It's installed the Raspberry Pi operating system on there. It will come up with a bunch of messages there, but we know from experience that's going to take a little while. So Grace, if you just hit escape, that should cancel that message.
So that gets us to the end of this video, and we've made a working Raspberry Pi Zero. It took a bit longer than we expected, but there was nothing really difficult.
If you're following along at home, then we'll put the Raspberry Pi Foundation website links in the description box below.
And we've already got the next episode, Turning the Pi into a Spectrometer, ready. So click these images if you want to follow that.
And of course, don't forget to click the like and subscribe button so you get the next notification when the next installment is ready. We might even blow something up in the next video.